Have you ever noticed that as soon as your life starts getting better, somehow you end up going right back to the start? New money comes in and then you have a new expense or a new bill. A new relationship starts, it's going great, and eventually old habits resurface. New confidence starts to step in, and all of a sudden self doubt comes in. It's almost like there's this invisible force pulling you in anytime you try to step out and expand. And most people think that they're limited by their circumstance, but what if they're actually limited by an internal thermostat? A thermostat's job isn't growth, it's maintenance. And your subconscious beliefs and identity actually work in the same exact way. So if you watch the video to the end, I'm going to explain to you exactly why this happens and how you can finally break free from it, because so long as you're being run by this thermostat, you cannot move past your certain set point. So what creates this thermostat? Well, it's actually built on repetition. So the only reason why you keep returning back to that specific baseline is because that's what you've conditioned to be familiar. That's it. So imagine yourself walking through a field. Eventually, day after day, a path's going to start forming. And the more you walk it, the deeper it becomes, the more ingrained it becomes. But if one day you decide to walk a different path, it's going to feel uncomfortable, not because it's wrong, but because it's unfamiliar. So beliefs work in the exact same way. Whenever you try to deviate from them, you feel discomfort, not because the beliefs are truth, not because you're supposed to follow them, but it's just your nervous system doing what it's supposed to, which is trying to keep you in what you've conditioned to be familiar. It's what you've practiced long enough so that it's now become automatic. That's why it feels easier, more natural to continue to follow the same path. And from a neuroscience perspective, there's this concept that states neurons that fire together wire together. And the idea is that we know that through neuroplasticity, you can rewire your brain. But the more you start to activate the same pathways, the stronger they become in the brain. So what was once conscious choice eventually becomes automatic without needing any effort. And that's why, if you've conditioned yourself to be stressful, the body can eventually start to request and manufacture those same stress hormones whenever it wants, because that's what keeps it in what's familiar to it. So it's crazy to think, but the body would rather stay in the familiar discomfort rather than open up the unfamiliar possibilities. And that's why whenever you try to start that new diet, that new routine, that new social media page, new business, whatever it is, you feel like the body is immediately pulling you back, creating self-doubt. It's not because what you're doing is wrong, but it's because it understands that you're trying to step into something it can't plan for. And it would rather go back to what's familiar for survival. So now the question becomes, how do we break free from this thermostat? Thoughts alone are insufficient. Information on its own isn't enough to change the nervous system. But scientifically, we've seen that when you actually experience emotional charge paired with meaning, with information, that's when the body is more likely to register it within longer term memory and actually tap into the deeper parts of yourself where you're now changing your state of being, your identity. It becomes a more meaningful, significant event. And that's what we're looking for. We're looking for a full-on embodied experience. And what are emotions? Emotions suggest, or they are a byproduct, they come on the other side of an experience. And because the brain is this powerful, that even through thought alone, imagination, not physical experience, imagined experience, is enough to generate this feeling, right? But the key thing again is thought alone is insufficient. Thought that leads to emotion is what creates an experience that the body remembers. And now we're training the body to become familiar with a new identity. So now, simply put, we understand that the old identity, your thermostat, is nothing but a practiced, rehearsed combination of intention and emotion of different circumstances of your past. And it's been practiced so much that it feels like it's who you are now. And so installing a new thermostat is now practicing, rehearsing a new identity in the same exact way. And the more you activate these pathways, once again, the more you strengthen it, the more the new identity becomes habitual. And the less you activate the old self, the old pathways, eventually the body will recognize, the mind will recognize that these aren't being used anymore. It's almost like when you neglect a muscle, eventually it starts to atrophy. The body starts to break it down because it's not being used. It's efficient in that way. And the same exact thing can be done with these neural pathways. The idea is you want to try and catch yourself when you're slipping back into old habits and move back, reframe, and train the new personality. Do this long enough, and at some point, scales are going to tip. where the old personality becomes unfamiliar and the new one becomes familiar and starts to fire automatically. And that's when, without any conscious effort, you've installed the new personality, the new thermostat, you've moved to a new reality, and it becomes effortless. In the same way that you just wake up and you brush your teeth and it takes no conscious effort from you. It's because that's who you are, you've conditioned yourself. But if you could somehow go back to the memory of when you first started to brush your teeth when you were a kid, maybe you remember how much your parents needed to beg you to do it or force you to do it, right? And now obviously it sounds silly because it's just who I am, I don't need to think about it. So what we've done here in this video is I've walked you through the known self, understanding who you are and why that keeps you in the same set point, into the possible self, realizing that this was nothing more than a rehearsed behavior, rehearsed identity, but in the same way that it was practice, I can practice a new one. So the possibilities of what you want to be now open up. And eventually you get to the embodied self where you've done it long enough and you've strengthened the pathways. It is so habitual that it now runs automatically and is who you are. If you want any help or guidance on actually walking through this step by step, feel free to reach out. Otherwise, try this yourself and let me know how it goes.